Deep Threat Sports Network fans, welcome back. We're here with another episode of some college football talk today. I'm here with Bryant. You got myself. Hey, Dave, he's got a ton going on right now. He'll probably hop on mid-episode. Dave's actually in the middle of moving. Dave got himself a new job. Also combine that with being a dad of 3 and a husband. He's a busy, busy man right now. So right now, kind of through these off-season episodes, you'll probably get a lot of Bryant and myself, and I know Dave will be here when he can, and he'll be back full-time come college football season. But for tonight, we kind of have a new take on our little off-season approach here. The next couple of weeks, we're going to do some conference reviews. And tonight, we are going to hit off with the SEC conference. This is obviously Bryant and myself's favorite. So before we really dive too deep into things here, Bryant, what was your kind of overall take and general consensus of the SEC? And yes, before you go real quick, everybody out there watching this is probably going to see me munch a little bit of food here. And we are super busy this evening, but we wanted to get this in. So, Bryant, what's your overall consensus of the SEC right now as it sits?
Yeah, you had your typical players at the top. Texas came in and from the Big 12 and played very well this season. I don't think that was a surprise to anyone. But you had your Georgias, your Tennessees, your Alabamas. We'll talk about winners and losers later on in the show and what we thought preseason to what actually went down on the field. But overall, I thought the SEC was a little bit even this year as far as typical years before. It's been top heavy. It was always Georgia, Alabama at the top, and then whoever could get that 3-4 spot was there. But this year was definitely there was winnable games no matter who you played, I thought. So I think it was more of an even playing field. I think that goes back to our talks about NIL and how that's kind of leveled things as well across the country. And I think you definitely saw it in the SEC for sure.
Yeah, Brian. I mean, the SEC to me, it was a cannibalizing conference. It was kind of a down year, I guess you would say, when you don't really have all that many heavy hitters. Or I guess you could say it like this: when you aren't the conference that leads the way in the playoffs with the most teams, that is kind of a new sight, unfamiliar territory for the SEC. It feels like, with the Big Ten, yeah, getting 4 in there, and the SEC only getting 3. But I kind of the rumblings I'm hearing out there too, Brian, is they're already looking to expand this conference or this college football playoff and expand it to some more teams. And at that point, I think you're going to be guaranteed to get 4+ SEC schools in the college football playoffs. And obviously, too, if the season doesn't shape up and Alabama drops a game to Oklahoma at the very end, I think we 100% see 4 SEC teams in the college
Mhm.
football playoff as well, right? I mean, I think that probably would have kept SMU out. Alabama probably would have got the nod. And who knows what could have happened from there. Also, with all these new faces in the SEC, it was kind of a shakeup. So I'm really anxious to see how this conference does moving forward. I, by no means, am one that thinks the Big Ten is taking over in college football. I think the Big Ten's a very good conference, but I also think the SEC is just as good, honestly, if not better. I mean, truly, when you look at the draft rankings and all these players that come out of their conference to go to the NFL, the SEC leads the way mightily most of the time, it feels like. So I think that's really where you get your true diagnosis of a power football conference.
No, I totally agree with you. I think you definitely could have argued the Big Ten was probably a little bit better this season than the SEC. But if you go back to our previous show where we're discussing recruiting rankings, I think it was 8 or 9 of the top 10 teams were SEC teams. So I mean, even at the time, even if the SEC was down, they're primed and ready to reload and be a top tier conference like they have been in the previous decade and a half, more or less. So I think the SEC is going to slide right back into being the best conference, the premier conference in college football. And we'll see what happens in 2025. But like I mentioned, recruiting's been high for a majority of these teams. I think like 13 of the top 20 teams in the rankings we talked about in that show were in the SEC as well. So primed and ready for taking back that #1 spot in all college football as far as the conference is concerned.
Absolutely, Brian. I mean, the SEC is the SEC for a reason. Everybody wants to play there for the most part, it seems, for a reason. This is where big time football is played. It's battle in the trenches. And man, this is some of the best coaching in college football, the best recruiting. This is the real deal in college football.
I got a note on coaching. It's kind of wild this season. There's going to be no new coaches in the SEC come 2025. So that could also help bring some continuity across the conference for each individual team. I'm sure they'll play better as there hasn't been much shakeup at all. So I think that would definitely help too.
Yeah, absolutely. And that speaks kind of volume to what the SEC was even this last season, right? Like you don't have any turnover. There was no real standout that we have to get rid of this guy. I think there was a couple coaches that were on the hot seat coming into the season, and Sam Pittman, Billy Napier, I think there's also going to be some coaches on the hot seat in the SEC going into this 2025 season. But one thing I want to kind of stress here before we move on and really dive into it is this is a review. So all of you guys out there listening to us, this is not a preview. We're going to save the previews for closer to this kickoff of the regular season. And right now, we're really going to focus on just reviewing what this last 2024 season has brought to us. So not really a whole lot of diving into what these teams can be moving forward. It's just what they have done this last season. So, Bryant, without further ado here, we're going to go ahead and kick it off and talk about each team's rankings and what their conference record was and what the preseason polls had out there for this college football conference in the SEC. And leading that off, we had Vanderbilt at 16, Mississippi State at 15, Arkansas 14, South Carolina 13, Florida 12, Kentucky 11, Auburn 10, A&M 9, Oklahoma 8, Tennessee 7, Mizzou 6, LSU 5, Ole Miss 4, Alabama 3, Texas 2, Georgia 1. Bryant, obviously hindsight is 2020, and we know how these things ended up. Did you ever in a million years think that Vanderbilt would not finish dead last in the SEC conference this season? Not only not dead last, but Bryant, they finished above Oklahoma, Auburn, Kentucky, and Mississippi State and checking at the 12th spot. Congratulations to Vanderbilt.
Absolutely. I think Clark Lee probably has a lifetime contract in Nashville if he keeps winning games like he did this past season. But he did a great job, and they rallied behind their quarterback in Diego Pavia, and a pretty damn good defense as well. So, yeah, that's something. Vandy's kind of always the lock-in dead last. You're just going to put them last and roll, and it's obviously been like that for a long time. But when you say they finished better than Oklahoma, even though I have immense disdain for the Oklahoma Sooners, I would have called you crazy.
Yeah, man, this is Diego Pavia really was a game changer on that football team. Clark Lee, fantastic coach, man. This team bought in and they did it well. I'm really excited to see what direction they go from here. Do they kind of crash back down to what seems to be the norm for them, or do they kind of take off? We may talk about them a little bit later too. They might be one of our big winners from this conference. Bryant and I are going to give a couple big winners, couple big losers on the season, and you might find Vanderbilt in one of those spots. But to kind of wrap things up on how these teams finished in the SEC this last season, we had Mississippi State at 16, finishing the season 0-8 in conference play. We had Kentucky at 15, going 1-7 in conference play. Auburn, 14, 2-6 in conference play. Number 13, Oklahoma, 2-6 in conference play. Welcome to the SEC. Number 12, Vanderbilt at 3-5 in SEC play. 11, Arkansas at 3-5 in SEC play. The Florida Gators, number 10 at 4-4 in SEC play. Texas A&M at number 9 going 5-3. LSU at number 8 going 5-3. Alabama at number 7 going 5-3. South Carolina at number 6 going 5-3. Number 5 Mizzou going 5-3. Number 4 Ole Miss going 5-3. Number 3 Tennessee at 6-2. Georgia number 2 at 6-2. Texas number 1 at 7-1. Welcome to the SEC to them as well. I'd have to say it with them as well. Otherwise, I'd be a real biased take on Oklahoma. But as you kind of see there for everybody listening, we had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 teams in the season in the SEC at 5-3. This was a gauntlet. This was a cannibalizing conference in college football. These teams were going at it all year long. Injuries piled up, and it's just a lot, man, week in and week out to battle these schedules.
No, I think you hit the nail on the head earlier in the intro, saying everybody was cannibalizing and beating up on each other, and all those 5-3 records are, just that this tells you the story right there. I mean, there's literally a 0-game difference between 4th in the conference and 9th in the conference as far as SEC record is concerned. There were so many swing games that could have went either way. Obviously, Mizzou won a bunch of games at home and close games that they could have been further down or even further up. And you could say that for a multitude of these teams in the middle of the pack. But yes, it was a gauntlet. It was more of a gauntlet than I remember it being in the past probably 5 or 6 seasons, whereas you didn't have the heavy hitters going 8-0, 7-1, and then you had a bunch of teams going like 1-7, 0-8. It was pretty average across the board as far as record was concerned in the conference. And you see it here, like I said, with 5 or 6 teams going 5-3.
Well, and what blew my mind too, Brian, is just the parity amongst the conference. Like top to bottom, 1 through 16. I would actually, let me cut this off. I would really say 1 through about 14 this last season. You could see that 14th ranked SEC team in Auburn go in and play a top-ranked football team in the conference and never really feel truly comfortable if you're that top-ranked team. Like, it
Mhm.
was an even kill battle across the field. Now, obviously, Kentucky and Mississippi State did not have the best of seasons for them. And I think kind of moving forward, you will see like Mark Stoops. He's probably really heavy on the hot seat. I think Mark Stoops is a great coach, but Kentucky is not going to settle for a 4-8 record overall and a 1-7 conference record. That's just not what they're going to settle for. I mean, Kentucky football has really turned around with him. So it'd be a real shame to kind of see him go out this way. So for Mark Stoops' sake, I kind of hope they figure it out and move forward and have a pretty good season in 2025. But Bryant, unless you have anything else you want to add in general conversation about the SEC, let's kind of turn the page here and focus on our winners and losers from this season. So
It's perfect.
I'm
I think we hit the nail on the head with discussing, where the preseason went and where it ended up. And like you just mentioned, going into winners and losers. So if you want to start that off, let's roll.
Yeah, absolutely, Brian. So real quick, give me your first winner or loser who you would like to talk about first.
I'm going to go with winner, and we kind of discussed this earlier in the show. I think it's definitely Vanderbilt. It's kind of obvious when you beat Alabama. That's going to be a winning. That's going to be a winner of a season for especially a team like Vanderbilt. And they also almost beat Texas at home too. Clark Lay, we mentioned, has got them relevant. They've been recruiting better. And honestly, if you can play a good football in Nashville, the fans are going to support you because that is a big city, obviously, and a lot of people that live there. So Pavia was a star. I can't remember that. What is the tight end's name they have? It's slipping my mind. He was also very, very good. So my first winner is definitely Vanderbilt Commodores. We'll see if they can continue it or if they come kind of back down to earth like we mentioned.
Yeah, man, I hope they keep this thing going in the right direction. This was a really, really good football team. The tight end you're thinking of was Eli Stowers, I believe. The
That's
dude
right.
was an
Yes.
absolute monster. I think he will be a very good player at the next level. And Diego Pavia had him as a security blanket. And that defense, man, that defensive front and those big football games, Brian, they really showed up and showed out for that Vanderbilt team. And it was awesome that Vanderbilt fans had something to cheer for this year because, I mean, let's be honest, they haven't had a whole lot here in previous years. It's been a grind for them. And if there are still Vanderbilt fans with season tickets showing up and showing out, you are real dedicated football fans. So happy for them. The first team I'm going to talk about here, and my big winner of the 2024 football season in the SEC was the Florida Gators. And what's crazy to talk about Florida Gators was that with an 8-5 record and a 4-4 conference record and say they were the big winners. Well, Brian, it was because there was so much negativity surrounding this football team coming into the season. We had many conversations, you, I, Dave, all of us, anybody out there that you listen to, all the analysts talking about how, hey man, Billy Napier, he's gone by week 6. This guy is not the guy for the team next year. This is not a very good football team. Coming into the season, their over/under win total was in between 5.5 and 6.5, and people were hammering the under on that. This was a really, really bad. This was a really, really negative uh, environment and conversation surrounding the Florida Gators, who have been such a powerhouse in this SEC conference for quite some time. So when you really break all this down and you take all that into consideration, they have got to be what I consider a big winner for this last season, Bryant. They were a pretty damn good football team, especially down the stretch. You see them close the season out on a 4-game win streak, beating LSU and Ole Miss. They take Tennessee to overtime, who was a college football playoff team representing the SEC. Just really, really good stuff for them moving down the stretch. Also, contribute a lot of that to DJ Lagway, right? DJ Lagway is going to be a franchise type quarterback for the Florida Gators. He is the real deal. He showed tons of growth. He really showed that, hey, man, I can lead this football team. I think he is what saved Billy Napier's job. I think he is what turned this program around this season. And I think he is also what helps in the recruiting battle for the Florida Gators and out there, all these other teams that they're going up against in this recruiting trail. So really good stuff for them. That is why I chalked them up as a big winner this season, because obviously everybody out there thought that they were not going to be anywhere near big winners. Congratulations to them on what they did accomplish, to Billy Napier getting that, not really an extension, but that security blanket of, hey, we're not getting rid of you just yet. And you bring in a top 10 recruiting class, according to 247 for the 2025 season. Hey, man, good stuff there for the Gators.
Yeah, and you mentioned it starting off that before the season, everybody thought that Florida was going to be Billy Napier was going to be fired by week 6, and it turns out, and after week 6 and kind of in the middle of the season, that was still the case. I mean, they weren't playing good; they just got destroyed by A&M with the backup quarterback. Now Marcel Reed ended up being pretty good, but Billy Napier kind of had to throw something against the wall as kind of a last ditch effort and hoped it stick. And thank God for him that it was DJ Lagway and turned out to be exactly what the team needed to rattle off 4 out of 4 wins in the last 6 games to ended up with a winning record. So I definitely agree with you. Florida was a big winner for themselves this season compared to where we started in the preseason.
I fully expect us when we do our football preview for the 2025 season, and we talk about the Florida Gators, to spend some extensive time talking about DJ Lagway and what he brings to this Florida Gators football program and just how damn good that guy is. But Bryant, let's not dive too deep into what they're going to be. What is your next team to talk about, winner or loser?
I'm going to go with the loser this go around. Kind of switch it up here. I'm going to go with the Auburn Tigers. They just had kind of a down year, and it all started there at the beginning of the season when they had that horrible loss to Cal. Definitely should not have lost that game, especially at home. They were kind of back and forth between quarterbacks. Ended up rolling with Peyton Thorne, and he wasn't anything special, but kind of kept it afloat. They kind of saved their season a little bit there at the end with beating A&M, and I can't remember how many overtimes. I think it was 6 or 7. That definitely was a bright spot to finish off the season, but that was their only really impressive win. Bad season, especially coming into a higher expectation year with it being Hugh Freeze's second season, and that when he historically tends to take that next step, and he just did not do it. And like I mentioned, couldn't figure out a quarterback. They had a pretty good defense, but they could not score points. We saw almost every game they were sub 20 points, and that was kind of detrimental to them this season. So one of my losers this year was definitely Auburn.
Yeah, man, it was for me. It was time for Auburn to really kind of take that next step, kind of right. And to your point, I think Hugh Freeze has to kind of get it done coming into this next season, or you could see some big things shake up for the Auburn Tigers moving forward. Credit to them though, man. They do have some stud receivers on the outside that's going to be returning for them, and they can do it. They can be a really good football program. Hugh Freeze is a really good coach, and what you're seeing on the recruiting show right now from Hugh Freeze is pretty damn good. And I think it's a last ditch effort, and he's really going to have to prove himself. I agree with you, Bryant. I think they were losers again this season, not just record wise. I think they just isn't what Auburn is looking for.
Yeah.
And you have something else?
I was just going to say, I just expected more from them, just from the fact that, their in-state rival Alabama, their legendary coach is retired. It's time for us to take that next step and be that premier football team possibly here in the state this season. Let's go ahead and tack it. And they absolutely did not do that. So it wasn't in a horrible year. It's not a fireable offense by any means for any of the coaching staff. So they definitely recruit very well. So I'm sure we'll see them higher up on the standings coming 2025.
Well, I was going to talk about a different team, but because of the point you just made right there and how Nick Saban's gone and the SEC's kind of feels like it's almost up for grabs when before it wasn't ever really up for grabs. So I'm going to talk about a team that I wasn't going to talk about yet, but I'm going to go ahead and focus on this team right here. LSU Tigers. For me, I think they were big losers this year, Bryant. And a couple of reasons why is because of the thing you just said right there. The SEC is open. Nick Saban's gone. LSU should be one of the premier programs in the SEC. This was kind of the year for somebody to go get it, and these teams just kind of let Texas come into the SEC and kind of take it. I mean, even Georgia, per se, in that matter. I'm not going to sit here and talk about how Georgia was losers because they weren't. They had a lot of adversity and still overcame and made the playoffs. But like LSU, for me, is one of those teams that has the utmost expectations all the time. They go out and they steal Mizzou's defensive coordinator and make him one of the highest paid coordinators in the country, and Blake
The
Baker.
highest paid.
And your
The highest paid. He was the highest paid.
offensive talent. Was I froze there, Bryant?
Just a bit. Can't hear you.
You got me now?
Yep.
Sorry, everybody out there. I'm in the middle of moving to a new house or building a new house. I'm out here on some Starlink Wi-Fi, and sometimes it really just takes a shit. And I can't wait to get on some fiber internet so I can get over all this BS here. But what I was saying is with the SEC being up for grabs and you can really go get it, LSU Tigers are a program that should always be able to go get it. You come into the season with a win total of 9.5. You come up short at 8-4. You have Garrett Nussmeier, who people are talking about potentially could have been a first-round draft pick quarterback. You have Kyron Lacey, who has all the talent in the world. You have tons of receivers out there. Your offense is always high powered. You have a great offensive line, and then you come up with an 8-4 record. Bryant, to me, that's just not very good. And like we were just talking about before my internet took a shit, Blake Baker coming in, being the highest paid defensive coordinator in college football, you don't really make a ton of strides there. Yeah, and your defense just really wasn't all that good. They let you lose some football games. I really, for me, don't feel like this is trending necessarily in the right direction. You also have the number one quarterback in the 2025 class wrapped up for months. And then all of a sudden, because your season probably goes the way it does, and Michigan comes in at the end and spends some big NIL money, you now lose the future of your program. He goes elsewhere. It just feels like, Bryant, this is going in the wrong direction. And I feel like for me right now, Brian Kelly is on top five hottest seat in the country coming into the 2025 season. I don't feel like they right now are where LSU Tigers and the boosters in this athletic department, they are not where they want them to be right now.
No, I definitely agree with you. We talked about Brian Kelly extensively during the season. I think we'll bring up LSU a lot this offseason and where we see them slotted coming up in 2025. But in my opinion, I think this is the biggest loser in all of the SEC as far as the 2024 season was concerned. You rattled off a bunch of good points as their over under wins total didn't hit. They had a lot of good players, Nussmeyer, Tyron Lacey, et cetera, that just did not get it going. And like you mentioned, Blake Baker was horrible on on recruiting that defense. And I agree with you. I personally think Brian Kelly is probably on the hottest seat coming into 2025, just for the fact of the expectations they have down there in Baton Rouge. And also, he's just not being a very likable guy. Just doesn't seem to fit in very well either. But I'm following you on this one. LSU, big loser in 2024 as far as
His
the season went concerned.
his press conferences are horrible, man. And then he leaves Notre Dame because he says he can't get it done with Notre Dame. And then you come back and watch Notre Dame go to the college football national championship game, and you're here with LSU, who's supposed to have more NIL money, be better fit to go make a national championship run, and you have them going in the wrong direction. If I'm Brian Kelly, I'm looking back thinking, man, I should have stayed at Notre Dame for the long haul. I had things figured out there. They thought I was the bee's knees. And now you come down and you give really shitty interviews, really shitty press conferences after games, and you don't win the games that you're supposed to all the time at LSU. Just not the best program right now, and I don't know how it fares out. And kind of talking about hot seats and who we think's there, the only other coach that I think could be on a hotter seat than him, I'll just go again right now since I'm kind of on a little bit of a hot seat rant. Oklahoma. They were my other real big loser in the SEC this year. I know it was a transition year. I know it's your first year in the SEC. But listen, everybody up that's Oklahoma fans, all they do is, with all due respect, run their mouth. They thought this was going to be no big step for them coming into the SEC. Thought they were going to slide right in, be a top tier program. Hey, man, you weren't. It wasn't good. I think you were one of the biggest losers of the 2024 college football season in the SEC. And I also think that Brent Venables is on just as hot of a seat, if not hotter, than Brian Kelly. You had Jackson Arnold, who you were going to build your whole entire program around, and halfway through the season, you bench him. You have Hawkins come in, play a little bit of quarterback. Now you don't really want him. Now you go out in the portal and get John Mateer. I credit to them. I think most teams in the country would go get John Mateer if they could. So I'm glad they got to wrap that up for the Oklahoma Sooners. But, man, you also come in and you were projected to have 7.5, 8 wins coming into the season, and you come up short of 6-6 record. Brian, this was really not good from the Oklahoma Sooners this season.
Yeah, and they've blamed it a lot on the injuries they had, which that was part of the reason. But every team in the SEC is always injured. You got to have depth, and they had Big 12 depth. To be blatantly honest, they did not have SEC depth, and it showed.
Yeah.
That's why they went 6-6. But I want to give a little credit to Brent Venables. He has gone out in the portal and gone out and recruited his ass off, and is trying to do his best, bringing in new guys, new faces, and trying to rework it and build for this coming season because and I know that he knows he's on the hot seat. I definitely agree with you. He's probably also very up there on being a coach that needs to watch his back coming into this season. But yeah, Oklahoma just got kind of blindsided with being the SEC and not the Big 12 anymore. And there was no weeks off this season, and it definitely showed.
Well, Brian, they opened up the season in 2024 with
This guy was horrible again.
well, they opened up this last season with 3 out of conference wins. And then
Mm-hmm.
they go 3-9 the rest of the way. And one of those wins came against Maine. Now, the other one of those wins did come against Alabama. But if Alabama doesn't just show up and literally shit on the field and completely fall apart and give away every playoff chance they had, we're talking about a team that should have really went 2-10 down the stretch and went, what is that, 5 and instead of going 6-6, they go 5-7 on the season. Brian,
Hmm.
that is not Oklahoma football. That is not Oklahoma football, no matter what conference you're in. I don't think that anybody in Oklahoma is near anywhere near satisfied with how this first season went in the SEC. I think if you ask anybody out there, none of them would be like, "Oh, we went 6-6. We made a bowl game. We're okay." No, no, that is
No.
not the conversation going on out there right now. They are up in arms, and Brent Venables feels it. Yes, credit to them for going out and getting a pretty decent freshman class coming in for 2025. But this is real make or break, man. And also to your point about the injuries, that did happen to them a lot. It really was unfortunate. Jackson Arnold didn't have a whole lot of talent out there offensively to the football too for a while. I think he kind of got the short end of the stick in all of this and got a lot of the blame. But the blame kind of has to go somewhere, right? And if you're that good
Mhm.
of a quarterback and we're going to build our program around you, it shouldn't matter if you put you and me out there at receiver. Jackson Arnold should be able to throw us open, get us open. That was how highly touted he was at coming into this Oklahoma program. So I think this is make or break, and they really got to find it this next season.
Yeah, I definitely would not want to be John Mateer. He's going to have all the pressure and in all of Oklahoma on his shoulders if he has a bad game anywhere in there, or if he doesn't live up to their preseason narrative and hype. Then it's going to be a wild off season next year in Norman. Who was the offensive coordinator they brought in from Washington State? I can't remember his name.
Uh,
It was John Mateer's offensive coordinator.
yeah,
Um,
yeah, they're kind
but
of a
so
package
that
deal.
I think that will help bring in some continuity there as well and help John Mateer play as good as he can play, and which we've seen this past season can be dynamic. So they have a lot to prove in Oklahoma, and they definitely have some of the players to do it. We're just going to see if they can bounce back from their first SEC season.
Well, and John Mateer is a really damn good quarterback, and I think the guy we're thinking of is Ben Arbuckle. He comes
That's
in
it.
from
Yes.
Washington State. And that package deal, the continuity, really does help John Mateer kind of come in and feel somewhat comfortable in a new system right here at the end of his career. I really do think that Oklahoma could be pretty good, but you kind of alluded to it. We don't want to spoil too much for our episodes down the stretch, but they have a really bad schedule again, really bad draw. And if your back's against the wall, not the schedule you're looking for necessarily. So,
Hmm.
Bryant, moving on from the Oklahoma Sooners, who is I'm gonna let you go back to back here. Who's your first team you want to talk about? And then after you finish that one, you can take away with your second one. Go ahead and give it to us.
So I'm going to go with two kind of teams you could maybe argue both sides, but I'm going to pick them this way. The first one is Tennessee, and I'm going to call them a winner. Yeah, they got absolutely demolished by Ohio State there in the first round of the playoffs, but they finished third in the SEC, which was very good. They showed some promise. Yeah, they were up and down, but their only real bad game was that the road loss at Arkansas. Third place finish. They got an SEC or a college football playoff berth. Nico showed promise, especially at the beginning of the season. He kind of got in his head a little bit there towards the end of the season, but was still playing very well with honestly not the best receiving core. He had a really good running back in Dylan Sampson, but he kind of put the team on his shoulders and got what needed to be done there towards the end of the season down the stretch and got them into the playoff. Um, they're mostly winners, finishing a lot higher than their preseason expectation. They finished third. They were projected to finish seven in the SEC this previous season, so that's why I kind of picked them as a winner. But coming up this year, they need to find some wide receivers to take kind of the pressure off of Nico a little bit and replace some of the guys they've lost. But they also, like I just mentioned, lost a bunch of players from this team. So obviously they do recruit very well. They always have, and they'll have players to backfill that. But they're going to have to. There's going to be a lot of new faces on the Tennessee Volunteers this coming season. But I'm going to call this season a winner.
You know what's crazy too, Bryant, is anybody that's followed along with us throughout the season and all the college football games that we covered, how many weeks did you and I and Dave hop on here and say, if Nico figures it out? Look, man, we're classified in 2024 as a win for them. You make the playoffs, you finish above expectations. And that was with us saying, if Nico figures it out. Well, I'm going to be honest, man. He never figured it out, and your team still outperformed the expectations. So I definitely say it was a winner. But for me, also, I felt like there was a lot more to be desired. Once I saw this team get going and that defense played at the level they played at, and Dylan Sampson came out, and you could argue he was a top 3, 4 running back in the country. I just kept thinking, man, that ceiling is actually really there for them to go play a national championship football game. It was
Mhm.
really there for them to go win the SEC conference this year. It was really there. So, yes, I agree. They outperformed expectations. You come in, I would classify it as a win, too. I just felt like they had more in the tank than what they were able to really uncover down the stretch of this season. And also, it's really hard to not have recency bias and look at the egg they laid against Ohio State, especially after their fans were trying to rename Ohio State Stadium like Neyland North or whatever they were trying to
Yeah,
name it. And then you
absolutely.
come out here and you damn near make it a home game, and your team just comes out and really underwhelms everybody.
I know that was like I mentioned right off the top when I started discussing them, is that was kind of the sour taste in the mouth that you kind of got to ignore and look at the whole 2024 season as one complete 12-game season rather than just that one game at the end, which we all saw that they did not play very well. But yeah, you're totally right. It was every week we're like, man, is this going to be week? Nico kind of finally pulls it back to how he was playing in the beginning of the season, and he never really fully did that. So I was right on there with you. I think Tennessee could have made a national title run this past season. But then Nico's still he was only a sophomore. He will be a true junior coming up this season. And that seems to be when sometimes the SEC quarterbacks tend to take off. So a lot to look forward to them. I think, like you said, it was totally correct, is there seemed to be a lot more meat on the bone than we got in 2024. But I'd rather have, some meat on the bone left to work on and build on in 25 than be bare bones and not have anywhere to turn. So Tennessee winner in 2024, in my opinion.
For sure. And to Nico's credit too here, we mentioned many episodes throughout the season, like they have a lot of receivers, but they don't have a real dominant receiver. Like they never had that alpha that if it's 3rd and 5, like they're for sure throwing him the ball. Like triple coverage doesn't matter. Nico's gonna put one on the dot and they're gonna go to this guy. I feel like they never had that. They had plenty of guys, I can't even think of them all right now. We had Brew McCoy, Squirrel White, also had some injuries stack up. So I feel like that receiving core could go in the right direction. I think Nico getting another year, having all the experience, playing in a playoff game, and you welcome back Nico and Josh Heupel is obviously one of the best offensive minds in the country. Sprinkle in some better receivers this season. I do think things should actually go upward for them. I think we could talk about them again at the end of next season and probably have them be a winner again. So, man, really good stuff for Tennessee to outpace expectations last season. So, Bryant, who's the last team that you're going to talk about here?
So this last team is also kind of a team you could argue either direction, and I'm going to go with Alabama. Obviously, they were picked to finish third in the SEC, and they finished seventh. Now, the last time you saw Alabama finish seventh in the SEC was before we were born, probably before pre Nick Saban, between Bear Bryant area. I don't know when, but yeah, they're a loser in my opinion. But I think you can also argue this a winner from this standpoint. When you lose a coach like Nick Saban, it's going to go downhill. But I think it could have gone way downhill. Yeah, they brought in Kalen DeBoer from Washington, who has won, but I think he did enough to keep this keep this program afloat. Yeah, they could have gotten better. They almost made the playoffs, but it just kind of fell apart there down the stretch. I'm going to call Alabama a loser for this season, but I think you could also argue winner, like I said, with them having a decent season post Nick Saban. I really do think this came down to Milroe kind of getting exposed in the later part of the season, trying to scramble and make obscene plays with his arm that, yeah, he could make at some points, but if you screw up, it's going to bite you. We saw it the season before when they were playing the playoff game and he fumbled the ball and then ended up losing against Georgia there. Was that Georgia? No. Who was it? In the Rose Bowl? Michigan.
Yeah,
Yeah, Michigan.
Michigan.
So
Yep.
you saw those mistakes come through more and more towards the season went on, and that's what kind of shot their season down. And definitely, like you mentioned earlier, the loss at Oklahoma was kind of the straw that broke the camel's back with them. But strictly a loser here, in my opinion, just because of the preseason ranking versus where they ended up. But like I mentioned, you could argue them either way. Their playmakers, besides Ryan Williams, really didn't show up this season much at all. I mean, Jam
No.
Miller was okay at running back, but they didn't have a workhorse there. And Ryan Williams was the best player on this team, and he was only 17. So I think that goes to show what kind of season it was for Alabama, up and down. loser as far as they're concerned with their expectations, obviously always being a national title. But like I mentioned, I think you could argue this either way.
So, just for conversational pieces here, one real quick. The last time Alabama was probably that low in conference finishing was probably 2006 when they went 6-7. I believe that was Nick Saban's first year as the head coach there.
Hmm.
Could be wrong on that, but I think that was his first year when he first took over. They go 2-6 in conference play. So that was probably whenever they like one of their worst performances in the conference dating back that far. But also with this, I would maybe just say you could classify it as a winner a little bit, only
Hmm.
because you are losing the greatest college football coach of all time, in my opinion. And you turn the page and you just don't know what it could be. And at one point, Bryant, it almost felt like maybe it could spiral out of control a little bit, and the fans were starting to be really uncomfortable. They were already calling for Kalen DeBoer's head. We were on our show saying, patience, Kalen DeBoer is a great coach. He just went to a national championship game with Washington. He is now at Alabama. He now has resources he's never had. Give him some time to figure this damn thing out because he's a really damn good football coach. So I'm with you because it's the name Alabama, because of the
Hmm.
expectation still. Yes, it was a loser, in my opinion, as well, too. You missed the playoffs, and in a 12-team playoff, you never thought in a million years Alabama would miss it. No matter if I was coaching it, you were coaching it, DeBoer's coaching it, Saban's coaching it, you thought they would be there. So I'm with you on that. I'm just trying to play a little devil's advocate here to bring in some reality to college football. Like, it's this is not easy. This is not easy stuff. And when you move on from the best coach in college football history and you turn the page, you might have a little bit of a reality check. And for me, part of me hopes the Bama fans miss the playoffs for the next 10 years so they realize that, hey, it comes in cycles, man. Football's
Yep.
cyclical. You don't always get to win.
Hmm.
Congratulations, you had your run, but now you're going to have to taste a little bit of some medicine that all these other programs have gone through and just took ass beatings from you year in and year out. I would classify them too as a loser solely for the fact of the Oklahoma game. Oklahoma was terrible, and you go in and you had your whole entire season in front of you still, and you go in and just crash and burn in a really ugly way. And it was on national television, obviously, Alabama, Oklahoma, their first year in the SEC, and you just took a thrashing. That was why I would classify this as a massive losing season for Alabama.
I'm right there on there with you. We'll see. Kalen DeBoer, I think, is a damn good coach. Obviously, like you mentioned, took Washington to the national championship the year before, so he knows how to win. And he made a good point. Their last losing season was probably when Nick Saban was first season there in Alabama, and we saw what happened with him. So obviously, I don't think Kalen DeBoer is the next Nick Saban, but he could easily turn it around very quick. And you made a good point saying he has all of the backing and all of the resources he would ever need down there to turn this boat around and kind of right the ship.
Well, and he's a brilliant mind, man. He's no Nick Saban, but he's a brilliant mind. He's a player's coach. These guys want to play for him. I mean, this is right where I think he should be. I think he is fit for the job. I'm really anxious to see how it goes. Also, I'm going to say this one last point, and then we're going to move on from Bama, and I'm going to give you my last team. I think Jalen Milroe was vastly overrated. I think Jalen Milroe going to the draft is the most asinine thing I've seen in a long time. I think that's a really bad move on his part. Obviously, his agent and his family know him better than I do. But from what I have seen, he is not NFL ready at all, in my opinion. I think he really struggles reading defensive. We talked about that on our shows throughout the season. And I think part of this move was I don't think Alabama wanted him back. I think they were ready to turn the page. I think DeBoer was ready to move on from him. I don't think he really fit the style. DeBoer loves running quarterbacks, but I don't think that Miller wanted to run the ball as much. So I don't think it was a perfect match like everybody thought it was going to be. So I think maybe he just went to the draft because how do you move on from no longer playing at Alabama, right? So I can kind of see the move, I guess, but I think Jalen Milroe was honestly quite a bit of the problem for this Alabama Crimson Tide football team in 2024. So the last team that I am going to talk about, Bryant, is a team that I could not have been higher on at the end of the season. I could not be higher on going into the
Agree.
2025 season.
Agree.
The South Carolina Gamecocks, massive, massive winners in my eyes, moving from the 2024 season. They end this damn thing going 9-3, well above the mark of a 5.5 projected win total. You go 5-3 in conference play. Shane Beamer is no longer on the hot seat. He's got this job wrapped up long term. This defense played at top 15 caliber across the board. And in my opinion, I thought they were a top 5 defense in the country. This football team was bought in. This football team was hungry. This football team had something to prove. Kyle Kennard and Dylan Stewart, I talked week in and week out. I know I beat that into oblivion that people were probably tired of hearing me talk about it. But those guys, I would turn them on right now and watch a replay of one of their football games from this last season just to watch those two guys eat on the defensive line. They were energetic. They were fun to watch. They played the game right, and they were in the backfield all the time. And how can we move on without talking about who I think is the best quarterback in the SEC moving into 2025 in Lenoris Sellers? This guy came alive. This guy is a dual threat quarterback. This guy can beat you with the long ball, beat you underneath. He can get out of the pocket. He's hard to bring down. He is a massive human being at the quarterback position. And Brian, I'm going to throw out a hot take here and cool me off if this is too hot. He is very Cam Newton-like, in my opinion. I think he truly has the potential to be that kind of college football quarterback for the South Carolina Gamecocks. And they have tons of receiver talent around him to allow him to take that next step and become that kind of guy. Nick Harbor is a monster at the receiver position for South Carolina, and Lenoris Sellers and him, really, really dirty things they can do down the stretch. Had a really good recruiting class, a really good transfer portal class. I cannot wait to watch South Carolina Gamecock football.
No, I 100% agree with you. I was going to pick them as my biggest winner, but I saw them here on your list, so I went with some other teams. South Carolina was the biggest surprise this season. You hit the nail on the head saying their defense was top 15, probably top 5 in the country, and that was with some young players. And also on the, like you mentioned with the North Sellers, I totally am following you too. He could be one of the best quarterbacks in this conference coming next season, and I was just thinking about that right before you mentioned who I could compare him to, and I can definitely see a lot of Cam Newton. Now, I don't think he's there yet, but he could definitely easily be that type of quarterback for this team next season. And I just go back to when we were watching that tight game there with them and our Tigers, Mizzou there later in the season, how it seemed like we have him tackled for a sack, and then all of a sudden he pops out and runs 20 yards or chucks it downfield and finds a guy on it with a dart open downfield. He can make plays anyway, either way, like you said, down the field, up, down low, checking it down, and also with his legs. So they're going to have probably some of the most hype in this conference coming into 25, and I think it's definitely warranted. They played so well down the stretch that you see that as well as the people they're returning. There's many reasons to be confident in Columbia, South Carolina.
And they're deserving, man. They've gone through it. You know, they're kind of like a Mizzou type program. They've had some highs, they've had some lows, and when the lows are low, they're real damn low. So I mean, they are really, really deserving of this. And I love when I see a team that has a 5.5 projected win total come in and just blow that shit out of the water. After October 26th on their bye, they came out and didn't lose a game the rest of the way. You saw the Norris Sellers make almost like a year's worth of stride in what would have been just mid-season. Like
6 weeks.
yeah, like the amount that he overcame and progressed in 6 weeks of playing live football, Brian, I cannot wait to see what he has in store for us in the 2025 season. And I don't have much else to add on South Carolina other than make sure you are tuned into them, make sure you get right with them, make sure you don't underestimate them because they are South Carolina. This was a damn fun football team to watch, a great environment. It was
Mhm.
so awesome to see that place selling out again. See the pregame routine where the fans are going nuts. They're out there singing, was it Sandstorm? And the
Yep.
place is rocking. The towels are waving. What an electrifying atmosphere for a college football game when they are humming on all cylinders. I am
Yeah.
stoked.
Credit to Billy Napier, like we've mentioned during the season, and I think a lot of people thought this. I think he was 2 or 3 on the hot seats coming into last year, just with how they were playing in previous seasons under his helm. And he definitely righted the ship. Became more of a well-rounded, more of a humble coach than he was the year before. Did I say Billy Napier? I meant Shane
You
Beamer. Excuse
you
me.
did, but I knew what you meant for sure.
I meant
Shane
Shane
Beamer. Yep.
Beamer. Billy Napier too. Anyway, Shane Beamer, yeah, definitely credit to him. I think he became a more seasoned and down to earth type coach this season than he was in previous years, and didn't overthink things. And I think it showed. Obviously, he had a lot better players to bring that to fruition. But credit to him. And like I think we'll talk about South Carolina extensively coming into this next season. So stay tuned with what we have coming with them guys.
Yeah, absolutely, Brian. This was really good stuff here. Obviously there was a lot more out there that we could probably talk about. We could spend hours talking about what the SEC had this last season. I feel like we touched on the major hitters, winners and losers wise. Really covered some good stuff right there. Hell, we covered 50% of the SEC conference right there, just off our winners and losers. I think some teams. I'm looking at our notes right here that you and I have down that we thought were going to be better. You kind of have Auburn, LSU, Bama. I had Bama, LSU, A&M. All teams that we thought could have been better. And not to really, there's nothing more that we can really add than what we just talked about. I mean, we talked a lot about what we thought those teams were going to be and what they didn't do and why we think they failed or why they succeeded. The only team that we didn't really stress on at all right there was Texas A&M, and that could go a lot of different directions. I mean, they had a lot of kind of controversy at the quarterback position. You didn't get a midseason quarterback battle going on. Not necessarily a good thing to ever have happen, especially when Wegman had such high expectations. And then I thought to myself a little bit more. You're in the middle of a new coach. You got Mike Elko coming in. Maybe I was just overthinking what Texas A&M could have been. But also,
Mhm.
you look at that defense, and they should have been a top 3 defense in the country. And all you needed to do is score a few points in a football game. So I'm anxious to see what they have in store next season. But I really don't have anything else on this SEC review, Brian. I think we really drove a lot of it home. So if you have anything else you want to add right now, go ahead and give it to me. And if not, I obviously expressed that South Carolina is my favorite team to watch in this 2025 season to see how it goes for them. Go ahead and give me your team that you're most excited to watch, even if it's South Carolina too, and we'll kind of wrap this thing up.
Yeah, I think there was, like you mentioned with A&M, they were kind of middle of the pack as far as winner and loser. I think you could argue them either way. And there was a few other teams like that too. Obviously, you could talk either direction with Mizzou. It could have been a winning. It was probably a winner season for them because we don't ever finish 10-3. Um, but also the expectations were a little bit higher. There's the old misses out there. There's the Arkansas talking them up and down too. So I think we hit a good winner and loser talk here on the show on what we thought turned out with the SEC last year. But as far as my team that I'm most excited to watch next season, I do think I'm going to follow you and pick South Carolina. I think they just have the most returning. They have the ball rolling, it seems like, in the right direction. And I don't know why I feel this, but their expectation for me almost kind of feels like Mizzou's was coming into this previous season, that you had all the guys coming back. I do think obviously Lenore Sellers is better than Brady Cook was this past season. But similar type expectations, like this is the year to do it and go and get it. I think Mizzou did okay this season. Let's see if South Carolina can do a little bit better than Mizzou did this previous season with similar expectations last summer.
I wish sports betting was legal in Missouri because I'm telling you right now, I would bet South Carolina to win the SEC conference in 2025. That is
Mm-hmm.
how high I am on them. To your point, they're returning everybody. Texas loses a ton. There's some rumors out there that maybe Arch Manning's not progressing like they wanted. Georgia's losing a ton. Tennessee kind of lost a ton. Ole Miss lost a ton. Our Mizzou Tigers lost a ton. You really go down this list of your heavy hitters in the conference, and they all lost a ton. South Carolina is returning a ton. One being their quarterback, one being the number one receiver, their number one defensive lineman. I mean, this team, they have all the intangibles, all the ingredients to, I'm serious, go out and win the SEC conference in 2025. It's just really going to come down to can Shane Beamer coach them up that much. I think that's what it comes down to, in my opinion.
Absolutely agree.
I really do. So without spoiling too much for our SEC preview, we're going to go ahead and wrap this thing up. Bryant, this was tons of fun, man. I'm glad you and I got to get back in here. Obviously, with the offseason and hectic lives, we're not talking about games, so we don't feel the pressure to make sure we're getting in here 2 and 3 times a week. Right now, we're just trying to get in here as often as we can, once every 7 days, 10 days, trying to make as much as we can happen. We have tons of good stuff for you guys that we want to make sure we cover before the college football season takes off again. So everybody out there that's been following along with us, we appreciate you. Continue to support us. You can follow us on X at DT_sports_, Instagram Deep Threat Sports with a Z, TikTok Deep Threat Sports Network, Facebook Deep Threat Sports Network, YouTube and Spotify at Deep Threat Sports. Once again, that's Bryant. I'm Collin. This is Deep Threat Sports Network. Hey, man, until next time, peace.